What if the greatest breakthroughs in human history never reached the public? What if the truth wasn't lost, but erased? There are moments when silence says more than any announcement. Moments when a locked lab, a wiped hard drive, or an unanswered phone call isn't just a glitch in the system, but the system's response to something it cannot allow. Across decades in different corners of the world, 10 of the brightest scientific minds simply disappeared. No bodies, no confessions. Just vanishing acts surrounded by unfinished equations and technology that bent the known laws of physics. Their work promised to redefine everything, not just how the world worked, but what it meant to be human. Some whispered that they had gone into hiding. Others suggested shadowy forces silenced them to preserve the status quo. But the facts, few as they are, all share one haunting detail. Each scientist had just crossed a threshold no one was supposed to cross. They weren't chasing fame. They were pursuing something else, truth, and not the kind you find in textbooks, but the kind that fractures certainty. That blurs the line between science and philosophy, between life and something more. Was it coincidence that Dr. Elena Rodriguez vanished just days after proving consciousness shapes reality? Or that Dr. Sarah Chen's anti-aging therapy, which made old mice young again, was never seen after her lab was sealed by unmarked agents? Is it really plausible that so many revolutionary minds chose, on their own, to walk away, erasing all traces of their life's work? Or is it something else? This series doesn't offer answers in the conventional sense. It offers something more unsettling, questions you're not supposed to ask. Not because they're forbidden, but because they might just be true. As we journey through their stories, part science, part mystery, part elegy, you'll hear not just what they discovered, but what those discoveries meant, to them, to us, to the idea of what reality even is. This isn't about conspiracy, it's about possibility, and the silence that sometimes follows it. What if reality only exists when we look at it, and if we all turned away, would it vanish? At the heart of Europe, deep beneath the surface of Geneva, lies one of humanity's most ambitious undertakings, the CERN Particle Accelerator. It's a place where the very building blocks of the universe are hurled into each other at near light speed, hoping to crack open reality itself. It was here that Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a theoretical physicist with a quiet voice and eyes that always seemed to be scanning something just beyond the visible, spent the last 8 years of her life on something called observer theory. It wasn't just another twist on quantum mechanics. It was a revolution. Rodriguez believed that consciousness didn't just collapse quantum wave functions as per the Copenhagen interpretation. It created reality from the ground up. She wasn't alone in speculating that the universe might be observer-dependent, but she had what others didn't: data. Her breakthrough came quietly. She began noticing small but consistent variations in the measurements of fundamental constants: the speed of light, gravitational strength, depending on who was conducting the experiment and what they expected to find. The differences were minute, but across millions of data points, they were statistically undeniable. If what she found was true, then physical reality doesn't exist as an objective, immutable system. It is a consensus, shaped by shared expectations, reinforced by collective observation. Matter, space, even time, all of it spun into being by conscious awareness. Rodriguez began to suspect that consciousness was not inside the universe. The universe was inside consciousness. On March 15, 2019, Elena walked into Laboratory 7, a windowless room with thick shielding and biometric locks. She was preparing to run an experiment unlike any other, isolating a quantum system from all conscious observation. The hypothesis was radical. If left truly unobserved, the system wouldn't just remain in superposition. It would cease to exist. What happened next has never been fully explained. Security footage shows her entering the lab. The door locks behind her. No one else enters or exits. Hours later, her keycard is used. Nowhere. The lab is sealed from the inside. Empty. Rodriguez is never seen again. In the hours following her disappearance, CERN's servers were wiped. Not partially, completely. Years of data vanished. Her notes erased, her backups corrupted. Only one partial equation remained, shared anonymously by a colleague before being taken down. It implied that space-time emerges not from mass or energy, but from expectation. And what does it mean if the world around us is only there because we agree that it should be? What if we stopped agreeing? Rodriguez's absence was quietly explained as a leave of absence, but no forwarding address was given, no interview, no farewell, just silence. Perhaps reality is a song we all hum together, she once said, but what happens when one voice drops out, or all of them? She went looking for the source of the melody, and vanished into the silence that follows. What if growing old wasn't natural at all? What if it was a program meant to end, and one scientist found the off switch? There's something almost holy about the idea of aging. The wrinkle-lined wisdom, the ticking clock we're all taught to respect, or fear. We see it as natural, inevitable, biology's gravity. But in a quiet corner of Harvard Medical School, Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't afraid to ask a different question. What if aging is optional? She wasn't the first to study telomeres, the little caps at the ends of chromosomes that wear down with time. But she went further, much further. Chen wasn't trying to slow aging. She was trying to reverse it. Her early studies involved gene therapy on mice. The results were staggering. Elderly mice, genetically equivalent to 80-year-old humans, were treated using a sequence she called the aging master switch. Within weeks, they weren't just healthier. They were younger, not cosmetically, biologically. Gray fur darkened, reflexes sharpened, muscles rebuilt. Scans showed internal organs reverting to prime function. It was as though time itself had been rolled back. Chen's discovery went beyond telomeres. She identified dormant genetic instructions, hidden deep in the genome, that activated during youth but shut off in adulthood. By reactivating these renewal protocols, she reawakened the body's own blueprint for vitality. It was as if aging was never a decay, but a choice biology made, and she found a way to unchoose it. Human trials began quietly, outside regulatory oversight. Volunteers in their 70s emerged months later with the cellular structure, immune function, and neuroplasticity of people in their 20s. It was, in every measurable sense, a biological resurrection. Then came the warnings. 24 hours before her scheduled press conference to unveil her findings, Chen sent an encrypted message to a close colleague. The message was brief. "They don't want this out. I may not make it to tomorrow." That evening, she entered her lab. Cameras recorded her arrival. They never recorded her leaving. By morning, the lab was sealed, her equipment removed, hard drives gone, access revoked. University officials announced she had resigned to pursue private opportunities. No forwarding details provided. But a single fragment of her final notes, recovered by a former student, offers a glimpse into what was lost. Aging is not wear and tear. It's software, a routine the body runs, and like all routines, it can be rewritten. Imagine a world where death from old age is rare, where 90-year-olds hike mountains, raise families, begin new careers, where the frailty of time no longer dictates what a life can be. Now imagine the institutions built on the assumption that time is fatal, and what it would mean to them if that assumption crumbled. Chen didn't just find the key to longer life. She found the door, and as she reached for the handle, she was gone. What if silence was never truly silent? What if every thought we've ever had was already a broadcast? In the neural halls of Stanford University, a strange experiment was unfolding, one that made seasoned scientists uncomfortable. Dr. Marcus Webb wasn't studying disease or decoding DNA. He was listening, not with his ears, but with machines designed to tune into the quiet hum of thought itself. Webb began with an obsession: savant syndrome. People who, after brain injuries, suddenly gained impossible abilities, playing symphonies by ear, solving equations without training. Webb believed these weren't accidents. They were activations. Through a series of intricate tests, he discovered a pattern: altered brainwave synchrony. In savants, different regions of the brain harmonized like instruments in a symphony. And if those patterns could be replicated, perhaps anyone could become a genius. That's when Webb built the prototype, a non-invasive device, part helmet, part signal processor, that bathed the brain in electromagnetic frequencies precisely tuned to unlock this hidden synchrony. Volunteers reported immediate changes: photographic memory, intuitive math, enhanced empathy. Some even claimed to feel others' emotions as if they were their own. Then came the real leap. Using custom algorithms, Webb isolated the frequency patterns associated with thought, emotion, and memory. He wasn't just boosting cognition. He was receiving transmissions. Thoughts, it turned out, weren't trapped inside skulls. The brain emitted faint electromagnetic signals carrying encoded mental content, too subtle for us to notice, but not too subtle to measure. Webb's system began decoding them. In a shielded lab, 2 participants sat in separate rooms. One was shown an image. The other described it, accurately, without ever seeing it. Then words, then feelings. Webb wasn't just enhancing the mind. He was proving that telepathy was real, not magic, not myth, just untapped biology. But something else emerged: fear. His data showed that the right frequency could transmit thoughts, but also receive them, silently and without consent. The mind, it seemed, had no firewall. Within days of his first public disclosure, Webb was approached. First, representatives from pharmaceutical giants, then government agents. They offered funding. Access, silence. He refused. 2 days before publishing his full results, Webb vanished. His lab was gutted, equipment gone, servers wiped. Stanford University offered a familiar explanation: private research, confidential, off the books. But no one heard from Marcus Webb again. "Thought," he once wrote, "is not private. It never was. We've simply lacked the tools to hear each other clearly, until now." What might the world become if minds could speak directly? If lies became detectable frequencies, if understanding no longer required words? And what might those in power do to prevent that world? Webb reached for that possibility, for a kind of collective awakening, and just as he tuned the signal, the line went dead. What if gravity isn't a constant, but a variable? What if it could be turned off, flipped, or folded like paper? On the 17th floor of Tokyo University's physics wing, surrounded by humming coils and diagrams that looked more like calligraphy than equations, Dr. Yuki Tanaka built machines that defied the most basic assumption of life on Earth, that what goes up must come down. Tanaka wasn't interested in rockets or propulsion. Her research had one target: gravity itself, not to overcome it, but to edit it. She wasn't chasing science fiction. She was chasing something buried deep in the mathematics of space-time, a flaw, or maybe a doorway missed by Einstein. While general relativity described how mass bends space, Tanaka proposed something more daring, that electromagnetic fields could bend gravity. Using high-frequency electromagnetic arrays of her own design, she demonstrated impossible phenomena. Objects suspended motionless in midair, droplets of mercury hovering in quiet defiance. local zones where gravity pulled upward instead of down. Some colleagues called it illusion, others magic. But when independent physicists arrived to verify her work, they left stunned. Their instruments confirmed it. Within the field Tanaka created, weight shifted, gravity changed. Sometimes it vanished. Her notes spoke of gravitational field lines, invisible threads woven through space-time, which could be twisted or redirected like streams of water. Her machines didn't cancel gravity. They rethreaded it. If scaled, her discovery would revolutionize civilization. Imagine freight floating with no fuel, buildings levitating during earthquakes, human travel freed from roads, rail, or even engines. The fossil fuel economy would become obsolete overnight. But 3 days before her scheduled presentation to the International Physics Consortium, Tanaka received visitors. The security footage is clear. 2 men in suits, unregistered badges, entering her lab late at night. What happens next is less clear. Cameras black out, 4 hours lost to static. When they return, the lab is empty. Her equipment dismantled. Tanaka, gone. Tokyo University announced she had accepted a classified government research position. No one could say where or for whom. But one graduate student who managed to copy fragments of her final schematics recalled something haunting. Her last prototype wasn't just for hovering objects or bending force fields. It was a chamber designed to generate self-contained gravity anywhere. If gravity can be edited, she once told a colleague, then so can weight, inertia, maybe even time. It's all one weave, and I've found the thread. She didn't want to fight gravity. She wanted to rewrite its rules. And just as she was ready to show the world, the weight of silence fell. What if thoughts aren't locked in our heads? What if they drift, faint as whispers, waiting to be heard? At Johns Hopkins University, nestled between neurology labs and medical lecture halls, Dr. Robert Hayes was quietly breaking a boundary science had long dismissed as myth, the wall between minds. For decades, telepathy was the stuff of fiction, a trope for psychics, not scientists. Hayes disagreed. He didn't want to believe. He wanted to measure. And he did. His journey began with a simple observation. The brain is an electrical system. Neurons fire, circuits spark. And with every thought, emotion, or image, a faint electromagnetic signature is released. What if those signals weren't just noise? What if they carried meaning? Hayes developed an amplification system, a neural transceiver, capable of detecting and decoding these subtle brain emissions. Then, in a series of carefully controlled experiments, he tested it. 2 volunteers, 2 separate electromagnetically shielded rooms. One was shown a series of vivid images, a red apple, a lightning storm, a childhood memory. The other, with no sensory input, described what the first was seeing, and feeling, and remembering. Not perfectly, but undeniably, what Hayes had built wasn't just a thought reader. It was a thought bridge. Further experiments transmitted not just images, but full emotional states. Volunteers reported feeling someone else's fear, experiencing joy that wasn't theirs, or seeing a memory from someone else's eyes. To Hayes, the implications were seismic. Human minds weren't isolated. They were tunable. With the right frequency and the right sensitivity, consciousness could become shared. He wasn't enhancing ESP. He was revealing that telepathy is natural, dormant, a biological feature we've forgotten how to use, and his research didn't stop at transmission. He found that different types of thought operated on different frequencies, thoughts, emotions, sensory data, like channels on a cosmic radio. With this knowledge, he developed a prototype that could eavesdrop on neural broadcasts without the subject's knowledge. It worked, and that's when interest turned to surveillance. Intelligence agencies, private contractors, defense officials, they came not to debate ethics but to negotiate control. They saw what Hayes had built not as a revelation but as a weapon, a way to know anything, about anyone, without consent. The night before his scheduled publication, Hayes left the lab as usual. Calm, unbothered. He never arrived home. By morning, his servers were scrubbed, his devices gone, his name quietly removed from project rosters. The university issued a statement: extended leave, sabbatical. No details. But one research assistant kept a copy of Hayes's final journal entry. "We are not meant to be alone in our minds. We never were. The silence between us was always technological, not natural." Imagine a world where secrets evaporate, where empathy isn't a choice but a condition, where truth cannot be hidden. Hayes reached for that world, and before he could give it a voice, he was silenced. What if time is not a line, but a loop? What if the future can whisper back to the present, and someone learned to listen? In a dimly lit lab at MIT, where the hum of quantum computers never stopped, Dr. Lisa Morrison studied the unspeakable. Not time travel as Hollywood imagines it, not DeLoreans or wormholes, but a subtler kind of trespass, consciousness projected backward. She was fascinated by the quantum eraser experiments, those bizarre tests in which the act of future measurement appears to affect past outcomes. What Morrison saw wasn't a paradox. She saw a door. Her theory was daring. Under the right conditions, consciousness could reach into the past. Not to observe, but to influence, to nudge, to revise. She called it temporal resonance, the meaning that certain electromagnetic and quantum entangled fields could allow your mind to connect with earlier versions of itself. You wouldn't physically travel, but your intention could. To test it, she built a chamber lined with sensors, entanglement generators, and quantum random number machines. Then, using focused intention, she tried to will certain outcomes, not in real time, but in the past. The results were unsettling. After sessions in the chamber, random number generators showed patterns that weren't just unusual. They retroactively matched Morrison's intended results. In essence, her present thoughts seemed to be reshaping past data. If true, it meant time wasn't fixed, history wasn't stable, and intention had reach. She expanded her tests, focusing on stock predictions, weather outcomes, even political events. Her lab notes record a chilling trend, a growing accuracy in anticipating what hadn't happened yet, and subtle changes in data that should have been immutable. But she didn't stop there. Morrison began attempting to send information to herself from future states of consciousness. She described receiving impressions, ideas, warnings she hadn't consciously formed, yet recognized as her own. Temporal loops began to form, moments where she knew what was coming, without knowing how. Her most haunting entry came weeks before her disappearance. "I received a message from myself, not to publish, not yet. The future I saw wasn't just altered, it was controlled." She had begun preparing a demonstration for government officials, a real-time interaction with past data. But on August 14, 2020, her lab was found empty. The servers scrubbed, equipment gone. The lab walls, once covered in diagrams and equations, were bare. MIT announced she'd joined a classified research initiative. But no one ever saw her again. A colleague later revealed she'd confided something chilling just days before, that her future self had warned her not to continue, that time manipulation would be weaponized, used to rewrite history, to erase inconvenient futures. What she feared wasn't just lost time, it was edited time. "History is not a record," she once said, "it's a draft, and we're all writing it, forwards and backwards." Lisa Morrison didn't invent time travel. She discovered we were already doing it, without knowing. And as she tried to make us aware, she vanished, leaving time itself as the only witness. What if the limits we live with, intelligence, instinct, fear, were written into us on purpose? What if someone found the edit function? In a bright, glass-walled lab at the University of California, Dr. Kevin Park wasn't looking for evolution. He was looking for something older. His focus wasn't on the genes that make proteins, the 2% of the human genome that modern medicine obsesses over. Instead, he went deep into the so-called junk DNA, the 98% of the genome that generations of scientists had dismissed as evolutionary leftovers. But Park wasn't convinced it was junk. He began mapping patterns, using AI and code-breaking algorithms usually reserved for military intelligence. What emerged wasn't randomness. It was structure, order, syntax. Park discovered that non-coding DNA behaved more like software than biology, not just controlling traits, but dictating behavior, personality, memory, intuition, even the human capacity for empathy, fear, and, most shockingly, psychic potential. He called it the genetic operating system. With targeted edits, Park began rewriting small sequences in lab-grown tissue, then mice, then in tightly controlled and secret trials in humans. What happened next blurred the line between science and science fiction. Test subjects showed dramatic increases in cognitive ability. IQ jumped by 40 to 60 points. Memory became photographic. Emotional regulation sharpened. Pattern recognition soared. Brain scans revealed new neural networks forming in days, as if the mind was rebuilding itself from blueprints that had always been there, just locked. Then came the anomalies. Subjects began to report precognitive flashes, sensing outcomes before they occurred. Subtle telekinetic effects. An ability to feel electromagnetic fields. Some could even influence small electronics with intention alone. Park had done more than decode the code. He had uncovered a hidden layer of human potential, capacities evolution had buried, or perhaps something else had suppressed. And the implications were staggering. If intelligence, instinct, even consciousness could be upgraded with genetic tweaks, then the boundaries of what it meant to be human could shift overnight. But Park also saw the danger. In his final notes, he wrote, "There is no biological ceiling. Our limitations are artificial, imposed, not inherent. But once removed, who decides who gets the upgrade?" He began speaking, quietly, about creating an open-source model, a kind of genetic liberation. But not everyone wanted liberation. On October 5, 2019, days before publication, Park vanished. His lab was sealed, research erased, his name scrubbed from department listings. University officials issued a vague statement. Private research, no further comment. But one former assistant received an anonymous package days later, a partial genome sequence and a single line of text. You were never broken, just programmed to believe you were. What if humanity's greatest leap forward was already written inside us, waiting for the right person to find the key? Park turned that key and disappeared into the blank space beyond the code. What if this isn't the only Earth? What if, in the space between moments, other realities breathe beside ours, and someone found the way in? At Cambridge University, Dr. Ahmed Hassan wasn't searching the stars. He was searching sideways. While others obsessed over black holes and deep space, Hassan was exploring what quantum physics only dares to suggest, that every decision, every measurement may split the universe, not forward, but outward. He wasn't just theorizing parallel realities. He was visiting them. Building on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, Hassan developed a system of dimensional resonance. Using cascades of controlled quantum measurements and entangled particle fields. He created tiny openings, microscopic doorways, between realities where outcomes had unfolded differently. At first, the gateways lasted milliseconds, enough to observe blurred shadows of other worlds, then seconds, then longer. He recorded what no one else had: images, materials, even messages from alternate Earths. In one dimension, ancient languages were still spoken. In another, the Internet had never been invented. And in several, most disturbingly, civilization had collapsed entirely. Nuclear fire, plague, silence. But there were wonders, too. From one Earth, Hassan retrieved a crystalline metal that defied known chemistry. From another, a digital archive of medical cures centuries beyond our own. And in several, humanity had already discovered the very thing he had just achieved: dimensional travel. Through coded exchanges with alternate versions of himself, parallel Ahmeds, all pursuing the same science, he began building what he called the Panverse Network, a collaborative research community stretching across realities. Together, they dreamed of sharing knowledge freely, of solving problems no single world could master alone. But not everyone saw opportunity. Some saw power. On December 19, 2020, Hassan was working on what he called the first stable passage, a doorway large enough for human entry. Security footage shows strange electromagnetic interference around his lab. Then a burst of light. When systems reset, he was gone. No sign of struggle, no remains. The equipment had been destroyed. Not burned, but carefully dismantled, as if by someone who understood exactly what they were erasing. Cambridge officials issued the usual line: government clearance, classified projects, nothing more. But Hassan's last personal log, recovered from an off-site server, painted a darker picture. There are realities where we've destroyed ourselves, and others where we've learned to thrive. The real danger isn't the travel, it's who controls the traffic. If true, his technology could have redefined scarcity, knowledge, even diplomacy. A united multiverse, a bridge between futures. But instead, it became a locked gate, buried again. What Hassan glimpsed was more than theory. It was proof that our world is not alone, just one thread in a vast cosmic weave. He found the seam between worlds and stepped through. What if death is not an end but a transition? What if consciousness doesn't stop, it simply slips out of reach? At Stanford University, in a basement lab surrounded by silence and sensors, Dr. Mariah Santos was chasing ghosts, not metaphorically, but literally. She was no mystic. Her tools weren't candles or incantations. They were magnetometers, EEG arrays, precision instruments designed to listen to what no one believed could speak. Santos had spent her career studying near-death experiences, those strange moments of awareness reported after the brain had supposedly shut down. What she found changed everything. Even after clinical death, after the heart stopped and EEGs went flat, conscious signatures continued. Not noise, not decay. Patterns. Something, someone, remained. She theorized that consciousness wasn't produced by the brain. It used the brain like a signal uses a radio. And when the radio stopped working, the signal kept broadcasting. So she built devices to listen. Over years of quiet, careful study, Santos detected coherent electromagnetic patterns around the recently deceased. Not random activity, but structured, responsive signals, like a low-frequency conversation echoing just beyond the wall of life. Then she went further. She developed field modulation systems to respond. At first, the messages were simple: yes, no patterns. Then words, then memories. She called it Cross-Conscious Interface Technology, CCIT. And it worked. Subjects identified as post-mortem communicators responded with unmistakable personality traits, preferences, and, in one chilling test, a detailed memory of their own funeral. down to the song that was played. Santos didn't claim to discover an afterlife. She claimed to prove persistence, that consciousness doesn't vanish with death. It moves, shifts, and most astonishingly, it can communicate back. She envisioned a world where families stayed connected after death, where scientists could consult with minds long gone, where human knowledge never stopped growing, even in death. But others saw a threat. Religious institutions feared it would upend centuries of doctrine. Governments feared what messages might be passed from beyond. And intelligence agencies feared the implications for surveillance. On July 31, 2021, Santos prepared to present her findings at a closed international symposium. That night, she stayed late in the lab. Cameras captured her arrival. No one ever saw her leave. By morning, her lab was sealed, her data scrubbed, her interface devices gone. Stanford announced she had taken a sabbatical. Her email auto-replied with silence. One technician, who managed to preserve fragments of her final session, described a transmission received hours before she disappeared. The voice was calm, familiar. "Maria Wodzisz, you must stop. They are coming. But it's not the end." Was it her own voice? A future one? A past life? No one knows. But Santos had proven something few dare to believe, that death may not be the exit we thought it was. "We're not bodies with minds," she once said. "We're minds that briefly wear bodies." She reached across that invisible line, and just as it answered, she was gone. What if the universe is code? What if the laws of physics are just lines in a cosmic program? And someone found the back door? At MIT, where walls echo with the logic of equations and machines, Dr. James Wright sat between two disciplines that rarely spoke: quantum physics and computer science. He believed they were one and the same. While most scientists tried to explain the strangeness of quantum mechanics, Wright embraced it. Superposition, entanglement, wave function collapse. To him, they weren't mysteries, they were software behaviors. And the universe? A simulation, not metaphorically, literally. He didn't begin with metaphysics, he began with math. And his math led to something he called reality source code, a hidden framework beneath known physics, accessible through specific quantum manipulations. His lab was a hybrid, part quantum computer, part meditation chamber. Not because he was spiritual, but because he believed human consciousness had admin access. In his words, we are not just users, we're the programmers. Wright developed an interface, a system that allowed directed thought, combined with quantum input, to temporarily reprogram local physical constants. His early tests were small: a particle's mass, a shift in light speed. Then came the impossible. He created a zone within his lab where gravity weakened, where time passed more slowly, where rules bent. And every time, he did it by thinking specific patterns, intentions translated into quantum edits. He wasn't just changing matter. He was rewriting the operating system of reality. Then he made the mistake of saying so out loud. Word spread quickly. If true, Wright's discoveries didn't just threaten scientific orthodoxy, they threatened power itself. If anyone could learn to edit the rules of physics, weapons could be turned off mid-air, cities could be erased without bombs, truth itself could be rewritten. Wright refused to sell the technology. He wanted to build an open-access interface, a kind of reality OS anyone could use, a democratic leap into the programmable universe. But on February 14, 2022, the day of his scheduled demonstration to a small group of vetted physicists, his lab systems went haywire. Cameras blurred. Instruments malfunctioned. A flash of static and light. When security footage resumed hours later, the lab was empty. Not just cleared, sterilized. Even dust samples were gone. MIT released a statement. Reassignment to a government initiative. No confirmation. No address. No further comment. A colleague who had been slated to attend the demonstration found only a single message in their inbox. Reality isn't fixed, it's rendered. And I've seen the render settings. Wright didn't just ask if the world was real. He found the terminal window and typed in something new. What if mortality isn't biology, but policy? What if dying of old age is just the result of a switch? Left off too long. Not far from Harvard's glass towers, in a private lab funded off the books, Dr. Sarah Chen was redefining what it meant to be alive. Not just younger, not aging at all. Her research began like many others, studying telomeres, those tiny caps at the ends of our chromosomes that fray with time. But Chen saw beyond the usual models. She wasn't looking to extend life. She was looking to rewrite its limits. Through deep genomic sequencing and what she called retrogenetic activation, Chen discovered what she believed was the master switch of human aging, a regulatory system buried in our DNA that, when reawakened, could restore every cell in the human body to its prime state. Not slow down aging, reverse it. Her mouse trials defied belief. Elderly mice, equivalent to 80-year-old humans, regained the biology of youth within weeks. Not just longer life, restored organs, regrown tissues, vibrant neural activity. Time undone. And then she tried it on humans. Her volunteer subjects, carefully chosen, sworn to secrecy, were in their 70s and 80s. Months later, their biological markers matched those of 25-year-olds. They weren't just healthier, they were young again. Chen's findings weren't about miracle cures or cosmetic tweaks. They pointed to a deeper truth, that aging is not inevitable decay. It's a programmable state, a system designed to shut down. And she had the code to turn it back on. But biology isn't just science. It's economy. It's ideology. Entire industries rely on aging being fatal. Retirement systems, pharmaceuticals, funeral services, even religions. A world without death would have to be rewritten. And when word of her work began to spread, the warnings came. First, polite offers. Then pressure. 24 hours before her scheduled announcement, Chen sent a final, encrypted message to a colleague. They've made it clear, if I speak, I disappear. She entered her lab late that night. Security cameras captured her arrival. She was never seen again. By morning, the lab was sealed. Her equipment seized. Her servers scrubbed. Harvard issued a familiar statement. Resigned for private research. But no trail followed. No one ever heard from her again. One graduate student who had assisted with the early gene therapies held onto a single printed schematic, a diagram of the aging switch with a handwritten note at the bottom. You were never meant to grow old, just programmed to forget how not to. Chen didn't want to be a god. She wanted to give humanity the choice it had never had, to decide whether life ends when time says so or when we say it does. She stood at the edge of that threshold and was erased before she could step through. What if it wasn't coincidence? What if the real discovery was the silence that followed each breakthrough? 10 scientists, 10 vanishings, 10 revolutions cut short, not by failure, but by disappearance. On paper, their stories are unrelated. Different countries, different disciplines. One focused on gravity, another genetics, another the survival of consciousness itself. But step back, and a shape begins to form. They were all on the edge of something bigger, not just invention, but liberation. Elena Rodriguez proved that reality responds to observation. Sarah Chen rewrote the biology of aging. Marcus Webb mapped the pathways of telepathy. Yuki Tanaka bent gravity with electromagnetism. Robert Hayes showed thought transmission was measurable. Lisa Morrison changed the flow of time. Kevin Park cracked the genome's hidden potential. Ahmed Hassan opened doors to parallel Earths. Maria Santos reached beyond the veil of death. James Wright accessed the source code of reality. Each of them discovered a truth that threatens the foundations of power, not just institutional but conceptual. They didn't just challenge science, they challenged what it means to be human. What if we are not bound by space, time, biology, or even death? What if the only thing keeping us inside this cage is that we've been taught it's the whole world? Their disappearances aren't just tragic, they're systematic. Patterns emerge, data wiped within hours, labs sealed, unmarked agents, university statements citing classified research or private relocation. And always, the timing, just before release. It suggests a force not of chaos, but of coordination, not conspiracy, but containment. We don't know who they are. Governments, corporations, something older, but we know what they fear: awakening. The moment when billions realize the rules are not fixed, that the universe bends not to authority but to consciousness, that we are more than consumers of reality. We are its authors. Each of these scientists glimpsed a chapter in that hidden book. Each tried to turn the page, and each was silenced before the rest of us could read it. Truth, one of them wrote, isn't always forbidden. Sometimes it's just too dangerous to share with the unprepared, perhaps. But the danger cuts both ways, because if these discoveries are real and the pattern is deliberate, then someone has them now, and they're not sharing. What if truth doesn't vanish, but waits quietly for someone brave enough to find it again? Somewhere behind a locked door or a deleted file, the greatest discoveries of our time remain unfinished, not because they failed, but because someone decided we weren't ready. What do we do with that? Do we chalk it up to rumor? Dismiss it as myth? Or do we listen to the patterns, the silences, the almosts? Dr. Elena Rodriguez once said, "Reality is a song we all hum together." If that's true, then these 10 voices weren't silenced. They were muted. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that these people vanished, but that they reached something profound. And then the story stopped. Not with an ending, but with a question. Are we as a civilization ready for a world where reality bends to thought, where death is negotiable, where time loops and parallel lives unfold beside our own? Or are we still clinging to the comfort of known limits? Because these scientists didn't just rewrite physics, they rewrote possibility. And that's the most dangerous discovery of all. Not a machine, not a drug, not a portal, but the realization that the rules we live by might be optional. If they're still out there, and perhaps they are, maybe they're watching, waiting, not for permission, but for company. Every truth suppressed becomes a myth, one of them wrote, and every myth eventually becomes someone else's discovery. So here we are, not at the end of a story, but at the edge of one. The door they opened may still be ajar, and perhaps, just perhaps, it's waiting for you.